Catherine the Great was Catherine II. And she wasn't even Russian. She was German, but she was married to Peter the Third, who was decidedly not great. He was terrible. He was a man child. Okay. And so it's important for you to note Peter the First, Catherine the First, they were the couple. Peter was the great one in that. Catherine the Second and Peter the Third, they were a couple. And Catherine the Second was the great one. Okay, so keep that in mind. Catherine the Great is going to be a lot like Peter the Great in that she is going to continue the process of westernization or modernization of Russia, because she is going to rule as an enlightened despot. Okay, she is the Tsarina of Russia. Okay, and she rules after her husband mysteriously dies. Okay, she was married to Peter the Third, who was actually Russian. She came from Germany. Okay, she was an educated German princess who was Protestant. But when she marries into the Romanov family, she converts to Russian Orthodoxy, and she tries to become as Russian as possible, because her husband isn't really that great of a ruler. He's very childish. Like, he still liked to play with toys, even up into adulthood. Like, he would have little toy soldiers, you know, like made out of metal and painted. He would even play with his toys in bed. Like, can you just imagine like rolling over and you get poked by a toy soldier with a spear? Okay, so that was really annoying for her. He would even play with Russian soldiers, like real soldiers. He would make them come into his courtyard and he would like give them orders to like march around, and he would pretend he was a general, like real childish stuff. Then he cheated on her extensively, even inviting his mistresses into their home and to formal dinners and embarrassing her publicly in front of other diplomats. So overall, he was just pretty much a turd of a person, right? And she felt that she could be a much better ruler. And so she quietly had him assassinated under mysterious circumstances, which allowed her, as the queen regent, to take over. Okay, and so she is going to become the sole ruler of Russia after the assassination of her husband. And now she is going to be ruling as an enlightened despot. What this means is she is enlightened. She takes ideals from the Enlightenment, from Western Europe, and tries to implement them into Russia. Okay, so ideas like life, liberty, property. But what about that pesky right to rebel? What about that whole pro-democracy, voting people into power thing? Is she going to be pro that? No. Hence the despot part of the title. She is still going to retain absolute rule. She wants to be an absolute ruler. No elections, no parliament, no sharing of power. She's still an autocrat. So that's where we get the despot part of this statement. However, she is going to make advancements and modernizations, okay, that earn her the enlightened title. Does that make sense so far? In terms of what she did as an enlightened ruler, like many great rulers, like Justinian the Great with his Justinian Code, or Vladimir I with the Russkaya Pravda, she is going to attempt to codify and modernize the law system. Okay. In that law system, she is going to end the use of torture, because that torture kind of violates the whole life and liberty part of natural rights, and she's going to end the use of torture, which was a very common method used by Russian czars. Y'all may remember Ivan the Terrible, Ivan IV. He had his own secret police, the Oprichnina. Y'all may remember Peter the Great. He tortured and executed the Streltsy for their role in the coup led by his sister. But she is going to try to dampen down on that part of Russian history and become more modern. Other major successes included her continuing to expand Russia. So that's a continuity in Russian history, is that it keeps getting bigger. And what are the Russians searching for as they expand? What is their goal? What do they usually want to get from that expansion? Good, TJ and Callahan. Warm water ports. Okay, so she's going to continue to expand the size of this empire. She's also going to increase education for girls, which is a huge change in Russia. Okay, it'll move away from its traditional beliefs and values. Remember that Peter the Great increased women's rights by ending forced marriage and allowing women to interact freely with men outside of their family. Now they're becoming educated. She's also going to help the population of Russia through smallpox inoculations. And y'all, inoculations are like an early rudimentary form of vaccination. Okay, nowadays we get vaccinations in shots. It's all very medical and sterile. Back then, how they inoculated was they would take pus from a pustule, from smallpox or black plague or whatever it was, and they would attempt to denature the DNA. So they would try to kill the virus. Denaturing DNA is often accomplished through heating up the DNA. Okay, so once they've killed the virus, they then cut open someone's hand or make a cut somewhere on their body, and then they take that pus that they just got from a smallpox pustule and they rub it in the cut. Okay, introducing the weakened or dead virus to your immune system. So then your immune system reacts with white blood cells that go and attack this dead virus, and the virus can't fight back. And so obviously your immune system is going to win in that fight. Well, how does that prevent you from getting smallpox later when it's not a dead form of the virus? Because your body has produced antibodies. Okay, and so this inoculation was a way to end the spread of smallpox by giving people a much weaker version of the disease, or a dead form of the disease, so that their body could naturally build up its immune system to it. However, people are going to be kind of suspicious about inoculations. Like if you just go through like the logic of it of, oh, I'm going to prevent myself from getting a disease by giving myself the disease, there are going to be some people, especially in the noble class and the peasant class, that are going to say, yeah, that doesn't make sense. I'm not letting you cut me and rub smallpox pus on me. So how does she get over the naysayers who say this doesn't work? Well, she inoculates herself and her entire family. So the future czars of Russia are inoculated against smallpox, and they all survive. And so that's going to lead to a boost in popularity for the inoculations because it's deemed as safe. Okay. And so like Peter the Great, she is going to continue to westernize Russia, but she's going to come into some conflict with that. Number one, the autocratic ruler always has a power struggle with the nobles. Okay, the nobles always want to increase their power. So even though she's westernizing, and Western Europe had already ended serfdom earlier than Russia, she's not going to be able to end serfdom because the nobles need it, and she needs the nobles. So she needs their influence in order to remain in power. But she's also going to face pushback from the church, because the church is full of people who believe in Slavophilism. Okay, Slavo referring to Russian culture and traditions, filio referring to love. Now, who do we call the people who believed in Slavophilism that were a part of the Orthodox Church? The old believers. Good, Naomi. The old believers, dating back all the way to when Peter the Great was in power, Peter the First. So the old believers, how are they going to feel about medical advances and girls getting educated? Not so good. They're going to be against this. Okay, so she's going to be fighting the church just like Peter the Great did, but she's going to be relying more heavily on the boyars, okay, for their support to maintain her power. Okay, that means that serfdom, even though by this time it's ended in Western Europe due to the Enlightenment, it is going to be a continuity in Russian history all the way up until 1861. Now, we said that Russia got bigger So where did it expand? Well, notably expanded into Europe. It expanded specifically into Poland. But there were other countries in Europe that wanted that territory, namely Prussia and Austria, okay, close to the Holy Roman Empire. And so Catherine the Great works out a deal with Prussia and Austria to divide up Poland amongst the three of them. This is called the partition of Poland. Partition meaning cutting into parts. So these three powers divided up Poland amongst each other. And the effect of that is that Poland is not going to be its own independent country until the 1900s. And then, of course, after they become an independent country, all they want to do is exist. But Germany and Russia are going to continue to invade them over and over again in World War I and in World War II. So we're going to see some conflict there. Now, not everything that Catherine the Great did was super woke or great. Okay, she is going to discriminate against the Jewish population. In particular, she segregates Jewish populations into an area of Poland/Russia called the Pale of Settlement. Okay, this is where Jewish people are going to be forced to live separate from the Orthodox Russian people. Okay, now remember that the Jews have a long history, an unfortunate history of being forced through diasporas and discrimination. Okay, the Jewish diaspora out of Jerusalem and into Europe. Sephardic Jews had lived peacefully in the Al-Andalus, okay, the Iberian Peninsula. They'd lived in Spain and Portugal peacefully under the Umayyad dynasty until 1492, when Ferdinand and Isabella took over and began the Reconquista. Okay, under the Reconquista, the Sephardic Jews and Muslims were kicked out of the Iberian Peninsula, so continuing the diaspora. In Germany and Poland, you have the Ashkenazi Jews. They too are going to continue to face discrimination as a result of their belief system. But it's not just Lutherans, it's not just Catholics, it's not just Orthodox, okay? There is a long continuity of discrimination against the Jewish population. And this is going to lead to an increase in hate crimes against the Jews, including pogroms. That's an O. Okay, pogroms would be hate crimes against like the Pale of the Settlement, where people would go into Jewish neighborhoods and set them on fire and kidnap people and kill people. Okay, and so that is going to, I'll try to spell that more clearly. That is going to be an unfortunate part of history under Catherine the Great's rule. Okay, remember, the Enlightenment was like, okay, we're pro religious beliefs, okay, pro religious toleration. Okay, that's the statement, but that's not always going to be the reality that we see. Are we good so far? Now, expansion is expensive, okay? And as Russia expands, it's going to need to raise taxes to fund that expansion. And it's also going to need a large labor supply to work on the land that they've conquered for agricultural purposes. So serfdom is going to get worse under Catherine the Great, despite her Enlightenment ideas. In fact, it's going to be even worse than serfdom that existed in Western Europe. Okay, so comparing the two, Russian serfdom is the worst of the two. And it's going to continue for such a long time because it benefits the government and it benefits the nobility. So it benefits the people in power. So 1/3 of the entire Russian population is going to be made up of serfs. They're going to be taxed very highly. They're going to have very few rights. All right, and they're going to be a form of free or coerced labor. So how does serfdom benefit the government? Well, it keeps the peasants controlled. Okay, so controlling the peasants. How does it benefit the nobility? They get free labor. And Russia, as it expands, is agricultural. You don't see a lot of industry in Russia. Okay, they're behind Europe. So they're not going to have the Industrial Revolution right off of the bat. And so because Russia is more agricultural, it is more likely to need serf labor. So it's going to continue in this cycle, okay? And the conditions of serfdom are going to get worse and worse and deteriorate. Eventually, the serfs are going to be tired of the high taxes, not having enough rights, and the coerced labor. And eventually, they're going to try to use their numbers in their favor because they make up a large segment of the Russian population. This culminates in the Pugachev Rebellion. Now, Pugachev was the name of the leader of this rebellion, and he had gone around Russia telling people that he was Peter the Third. Now, who is Peter the Third again? Why would he claim to be Peter the Third? Who dat? Catherine II's husband. Exactly right. The last Tsar of Russia. But wait, I thought that Peter the Third had died. Well, Pugachev went around saying, I'm Peter the Third. My wife tried to kill me and I survived the assassination attempt. So now I'm going around Russia trying to raise an army. And if you help me, I'll end serfdom. So really, he's trying to grab power for himself. He knew full well that he wasn't Peter the Third. But if he's going to need an army, he needs to raise that army. And so he used that as his way of starting this rebellion. And it's going to be made up not only of serfs, but also Cossacks, which y'all may remember are Russian cowboys. These were escaped serfs that lived in the wilderness. They fought as mercenaries, meaning they fought for pay. And sometimes they'd even fought for the Russian government if they were paying them. But now they're rising up to fight against the Russian government. Now, unfortunately for the serfs, but fortunately for Catherine, this rebellion is going to fail. Okay, Catherine calls upon the boyars, okay, the nobles, and says, look, the serfs are rebelling. We need to put them down. Because if they take me out, then who do you think's next? They're going to take you out. So Catherine and the nobles team up to fight against the serfs, much like we saw in the Peasants' Rebellion with Luther, where the Catholics and the Lutherans sided together against the nobles, okay, because class trumped religion. And this rebellion is going to fail. In response to this rebellion, serfdom is going to get even worse. The oppression of the peasants is going to increase, because the government recognizes they need to keep tight control of this population in order to prevent another rebellion from happening and then succeeding. Does that make sense? So just like Confucianism is a major continuity in Chinese history, serfdom is a major continuity in Russian history. It's not until we get to the modern age that we start seeing serfdom falling apart. And the reason for this wasn't, oh, diplomatic or, oh, the serfs deserve rights. It was more political, okay? The Russians had to look at how it affected them politically. So under Tsar Alexander III, Russia went to war against the Ottoman Empire. Now, both of these empires are gunpowder empires. Russia is a Christian gunpowder empire. The Ottomans are a Muslim gunpowder empire. And why would Russia go to war against the Ottoman Empire? Why would they want this area of the map for their territory? Warm water ports, yet another historical continuity for Russia. Remember that Peter the Great had gone to war against Sweden for the Baltic Sea to get a warm water port. Now they're moving south to the Black Sea to get a warm water port. But it turns out that it wasn't just the Ottoman Turks that Russia ended up fighting. France and Britain jumped into the war. So that's a little confusing. Why would the French and the British get involved in this war? And if they were to get involved in this war, don't they have more in common with Russia than with the Ottomans? Like, what religion was Russia? They were Orthodox, yeah, which is a type of Christian. What religion were the Ottoman Turks? Muslim. What religion were the French? Christian, specifically Catholic. And what religion were the British? Christian, specifically Anglican. Okay, so you have 3 Christian European countries versus 1 Muslim empire. So why would the French and the British side with the Ottomans instead of siding with the Russians? Well, do we fight wars over religion anymore? No, not since 1648, okay, with the 30 Years' War. Now we fight wars over what? Good, TJ. The balance of power. Russia was getting too powerful. Expanding into the Black Sea and gaining this land could make them even more powerful than before. So the French and the British were looking at the expansion of Russia and they were like, okay, maybe we should be worried. We need to take them down a few pegs. So when they hear about this war against the Ottoman Empire used to be incredibly strong. Okay, but look at how close this date is getting to 1913. Okay, close to World War I. This is when we start seeing the very slow but steady decline of the Ottoman Empire. They were known as the sick man of Europe because they were in decline, but they just wouldn't die. They just kept declining. And so everyone was waiting like, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Okay. And so Russia may have had a chance against the Ottomans if it were just the Ottomans, but against the Ottomans plus the French plus the British, yeah, that was a no-go. So Russia is going to be defeated and they are going to take a devastating L, okay, in this war. Okay, and so they start questioning, why did we lose? What caused us to lose this battle? I thought we had modernized over the past 100 years. We had gotten corruption out of the military. We were training our army. We were building our port cities. What happened to make us lose this major war? And they landed on serfdom as the reason. That serfdom was undermining Russian power. Now, what does serfdom have to do with soldiers? How could serfdom undermine the Russians in this war? One-third of the Russian population were serfs. And when you go to war, you need soldiers. So you draft some soldiers. Under feudalism, y'all, the military is not very strong because it's based on, hey, tell your nobles that I need people. And then they have to send those people. Then they have to train those people. Had serfs ever fought before? Maybe in like bar fights, okay? But they were mostly agricultural laborers. So they weren't trained in military strategy. They weren't trained in how to fire a gun or how to even wield a sword, okay? And so the serfs were poorly trained, uneducated, and they had old weapons or they lacked weapons entirely. Like they were told, if the person in front of you falls down and dies, pick up their gun because you don't have one. So they'd send you into battle without a weapon and just be like, okay, go find one, like an Easter egg. That's going to happen again in World War II as well. Okay. And so they were behind militarily. And so they wanted to end serfdom, not because it was a form of coerced labor that was bad for their population, but because it was bad for them politically, that it was holding their country back from becoming modernized, and that it had led to their defeat in the Crimean War. So in 1861, we're going to see the end of serfdom under Alexander II. Okay, now just as a recap, looking at this map, this is all the Ottoman Empire. Okay, Greece is going to declare its independence from the Ottoman Empire and become its own country, but they still hold land in the Middle East, in Africa, and in Europe. Now they conquered Constantinople in 1453. And what did they rename Constantinople? Istanbul. Okay, and then Egypt is also going to essentially declare a basic independence, but they're still nominally under the Ottoman Empire, but we're going to talk about that if we get to period 3. Okay, so the Ottoman Empire became incredibly powerful, but now it's on the decline. And eventually by World War I, it is going to fall apart and become Turkey, which is right next to Hungary. Are we good so far? All right, so if you're looking at our historical thinking skills, causation, what was the catalyst for the end of serfdom? The Crimean War. Now, was that the only factor that led to the end of serfdom? No, you also have Enlightenment ideals. Okay, that eventually spread slowly throughout Russia and especially throughout Europe, and that's going to lead to the call for the end of serfdom. But the Crimean War was the major factor. It was the straw that broke the camel's back that led to the Tsar, Alexander II, to issue the Emancipation of 1861. Okay, emancipation means the freeing of. So serfs become legally free and they gain rights as independent free people, natural rights. This emancipation is going to end serfdom for 23 million people. This is the largest emancipation in world history, but it comes 100 years after Western Europe had already ended serfdom. Okay, so despite all their modernization, Russia was still behind the Western powers. It takes them a full century longer to end serfdom. Because of this, we can note a trend in world history during this time, period 3, away from slave labor and coerced labor. So that is historical significance, y'all. It is historically significant that from the move from period 2 to period 3, we see the rise and fall of slave empires. And then we start seeing a global trend away from slavery and a global trend towards independence, both in the form of countries and in populations. Okay, in Haiti, Saint-Domingue, 1804, we see the independent nation of Haiti emerge and they end slavery. In Jamaica with the Maroon Wars, that's one of the independence movements that ends slavery. In the Western Hemisphere after 1861, Russia had already ended serfdom. And in that same year, the United States enters into its Civil War. So by 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation is issued by Abraham Lincoln, okay, eventually ending slavery in the United States. The last country in the Western Hemisphere, in the New World, to end slavery was Brazil in 1888. That is very close, y'all, to the 1900s. Okay, and so we see the end of slavery being endorsed by governments and countries. Does that mean slavery is not in place today? No, slavery still exists throughout the world today, okay, but not as endorsed as a part of a country's government because of this global trend away from that as the Enlightenment spreads. Does that make sense?